way. And now I would like to welcome to the stage Mr. Panagiotis Kotronaros, who will give a very different kind of presentation.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to say a big thank you for the invitation to Stavros Niarchos Foundation this amazing afternoon. I came here to speak about how can we be recharged through inspiration, and I have already been recharged when I saw this amazing performance. So my name is Panos Kotronaros. I live in Athens. I have a family with 3 children, and I love to climb mountains. In 2004, I was the leader of the first successful Greek expedition to climb Mount Everest. And this is the reason I'm here today. I was not the first Greek, because the first Greek was Τι λες? Μπορεί να τα αλλάξει? Όχι.
Some small technical problems.
Ever Greek that reached summit of Everest was Konstantinos Niarchos. So, as a professional climber, as a professional mountaineering instructor, I have already established 2 companies, the Waypoint and Base Camp, and my main target all of these years is to train and teach people in mountaineering and climbing techniques. But today, I am here in order to answer in this fascinating question. What can we actually learn from mountain climbing to help us succeed in our personal and professional goals? I'm going to talk to you about my personal experiences on the mountains and share with you my team's philosophy. That means strategies, principles, and values to help you succeed in your personal and professional goals. And as a Himalayan climber, we have 3 characteristics that maybe fits to every people that act in the business market and the business environment today. First of all, is you have to think as a chess player. Second, you have to reflect as a Formula 1 driver. And third, you have to keep going, don't give up as a marathon as a marathon runner, and to keep going to the end, to your goal. But before I go with my presentation, I'd like to show you a video from Himalayan expedition in Himalayan mountains to get an idea what is an expedition up there is all about. This is Mount Everest. So when I was 10 years old, I saw this photo in my school book. It was a Nepalese climber, Tenzing Norgay. This is Tenzing Norgay. He, together with Hillary, were the first two men that managed to climb Mount Everest in 1953. This photo attracted my imagination. And one day I cut it out of my book and I put it on the wall in front of my desk because it was my personal inspirational moment. So long ago. Back then, life in Athens was very different. Very few people climbed mountains, and personally speaking, my parents and my relatives, they didn't have any idea about mountains. They didn't have travel experiences, and they didn't even have a car. So when I told them about my dream, they told me, no, that's not a job. So because I didn't have money, I started doing different jobs. One of them was working as a pizza delivery driver. And I started doing something easy to get to go through. For example, running. Running is a very simple sport. You just need a pair of shoes. And I ran many marathon races during my career as a runner, military races. I ran a Spartathlon, a historical race from Athens to Sparta, and also I took place in many swimming marathons. This is my athletic background. In 1995, I was member in the Himalayan expedition organized by the Hellenic Mountaineering and Climbing Federation. And I took place in many expeditions. Some of them, they had good, and some other, they had bad end. And we have some unsuccessful expeditions that we lost some friends up there. And these friends, they are not, we didn't lose these friends just because they didn't have the skills, but some of them we lost from bad strategies. The Himalayan range is the highest on Earth. The main part of the range is a boundary between Nepal and Tibet. We climbed the South Col route through Nepal. And I would like to take this opportunity to speak for a while for this amazing country. It is very nice to travel there, not just for the mountains, but also in order to see and live with the people, the Sherpas. It is a very friendly and very mountainous tribe. They help us very much to succeed in our goal because they help us to carry all of these loads up to the mountains. So, in order to show you what is the conditions up there, imagine that you are flying in an airplane, and when the pilot has reached the flying altitude, you look out the window and you see a climber scaling an icy peak at eye level, not just like this. So this is how high Everest is. And of course, it is an ultimate goal because it is a world record. When you go up there, you have been inside, you are one of the best climber, and you are in this elite that you can see the world from the highest point. And this was my dream. I wanted to see the world from the highest point. I wanted to be among the best. And up there, the altitude is so high that you can't breathe as you can breathe here in the normal conditions, because you have the 1/3 of the oxygen that you have here. And also we have a lot of people that they lost their lives up there, and the statistics are quite not so not so happy for this, because many people, they lost their lives in accidents with avalanche, falls, and things like this. So another big problem is the altitude. If you go so fast, which will go very fast, you are going to have acute mountain sickness and to develop some symptoms that may be to cost your life. So you have to be very, very careful with your program. Another problem is dehydration, weather conditions, and a problem that we faced the last 5 years is these queues. This is a big queue. There are many people from all over the world that they like to climb Mount Everest because it's very famous. So there are not only climbers, are also people from other sports, entrepreneurs, and many other people that they don't have so much experience, but they like to go up there because they are very ambitious to go up there. About the rescue, it's very difficult to be rescued up there because the helicopters, they don't have so strong machines, let's say, to fly in this altitude, above 5,000 meters. So it is not a good idea to put your hope to come somebody to rescue you up there. You are alone. You are alone with your teammates. And also, a very big problem is where to find the money to go up there. Because the budget, as you can see, is 250,000 euros. Just only for the permit, you have to pay about 50,000 euros for a team of 6, 7 people. So you have to concentrate, first of all, where to find the money. And our sport is not so famous. We are not basketballs. We are not footballers. And it is very difficult to attract some sponsors to give you this amount of money. Our federation tried to find the money, but it was very difficult. So we found a private sponsorship from Canada. And finally, we established our team just before the Olympic Games of 2004. And we started our final preparation program about a year before our final attempt. And preparation is the king. And why is the king? Because the preparation in a successful expedition starts many months before you put your rucksack on your shoulders and you go to climb these icy slopes. So we needed to have priorities, scheduled tasks, and deadlines long time before we go to airport. And also we had to do all of these tasks accordingly, and at the same time we have our normal life because we were not professional and we didn't have sponsors to pay all of these expenses. We needed to do this for Greece and to combine our knowledge and our physical effort with a big achievement for our country. Many people ask me why I climb high mountains, why to risk my life up there. And the reason is simple. I don't go up there to risk my life. I practice safety and I follow a set of rules. This is the set of rules. We are going to go up there. Our culture was to go up there with a maximum safety. So we have a framework, we have this checklist. We needed to do all of that things before we go there. because we didn't want to lose our lives on the mountain, and we wanted to come back with a successful result. Also, we made a plan. Every day up there cost 650 euros because the total budget for the rides is nearly 50,000 euros. So for a 75-day permit, you spend a lot of money for this 2.5 months. And you have to concentrate and you have to calculate everything to the very last detail. And as you can see here, the big part of our period, it is an acclimatization period, set up the Kumbu glacier and establishing the high camps that you need to have on the way up. And just 1 week, all of this just for 1 week, that is the final attempt. You have to establish many camps, 4 camps through the South Col route, in order to transfer all of this equipment time after time. Our base camp was our luxurious environments, let's say. We had the opportunity to have a communication tent there. We have our dining tent, the IC meeting room, as I used to say. And also another thing that we tried to do was to cut the distance, to make an intermediate target. So our first target was to go through this Kumbu glacier to the first camp. This route is a very dangerous route because there are a lot of crevasses and the glacier is a very dangerous environment. Just before Easter, just 2 months ago, we had a very big accident. Just there, 16 Sherpas died there from an avalanche. And so we had to carry all of this equipment up there. Also we had to establish ladders and ropes to save ourselves and our partners. The glacier is a very changing environment. And it looks like the environment that we have today in the market. It's very changing. So this is some movie from the glacier. This is a huge crevasse that we had to cross. Some of them, they have a width about 15 or 20 meters. And we didn't succeed if we didn't have all of our team connected together in one good, let's say, strenuous strength, and to have a performance as to be one people. And we have different culture, because we are Greeks, we have been growing up in different conditions, but without Sherpas, we didn't make. Didn't make. Also, between our climbers, we built a trust. When you climb and you have your teammate in your rope, you are responsible for your safety. So his life is in your hand. It's a very responsible job, and you are absolutely responsible for his movies and for his life. Another thing that I have to mention is the positive thinking. Many people ask me, you didn't think to go back, we didn't have problems. Of course, every day we have problems with glaciers, with our performance. We were tired sometimes, we are disappointed some other times when we have difficult conditions. But the positive thinking is something that gets you to go to go to move on. And also hard work because we had to carry 2 tons of equipment up there through these icy slopes. And finally, we arrived at the last camp. This is South Col camp at about at an altitude 8,000 meters. It's the last camp, and from this camp we tried for the summit attempt in 15th of May, the year 2004. I think I have a short video here, just before we start for the summit bid. We tried all night, and at the crack of dawn, we saw this atmosphere and this picture. We are not on the summit yet, but we can see this scheme to the Himalayan horizon. It was a very good sign for us. And that's the reason that I noticed here, seeing the peak getting closer and closer. And after that, we faced the last obstacle, a hilary step, a small step for the human, but a big step for the humanity. Sir Edmund Hillary went there in 1953, and he had the courage, and he had the positive thinking to overcome this vertical rock so high on the mountain, at an altitude about 8,700 meters. So, to climb up there, it is not only about physical effort, about physical condition. Of course, it is a very difficult and a very physically demanding task, but it is also about a mental approach, and you have to succeed in a very professional project. This is a scheme that I have in my mind when I'm climbing mountains. And we putting our soul at the last steps, because when you are up there, the minimum of oxygen and the dehydration that you have, you are feeling very exhausted. So you have to put as much effort as you have from your soul and to have as much energy as you can have. And I have also here, I think, a small video, a small interview, a short interview from the summit.
Έχει όμως ένα τέλος. Αν και στη δική μας περίπτωση δεν έχουμε τελειώσει ακόμα. Η προσπάθεια είναι στη μέση. Απομένει η κατάβαση. Κάναμε τις κατάβασεις. Αν έχουμε εδώ στην τροφή του κόσμου, είναι κάτι απίστευτο. Μοιάζει με μια διαγάλα στον όρικο, καλοκαιρινή. Πάντα τέτοια. Πάντα τέτοια.
So, that was our highest moment. At 16th of May 2004, the Greek team, the Greek national team, climbed to the highest summit for the first time as a team, up there just before 2 months before the Olympic Games of 2004. And as a conclusion, I would like to mention about the 5 elements, the 5 big values, that maybe they work for me and maybe they work also for you. This is, first of all, vision. You have to have vision for your project. You have to imagine yourself up there. Second, take ownership. Don't wait somebody else to do the things for you. Third, work hard. 4, strategy. Make your movie very carefully and be proactive. And 5, courage. This is my philosophy, let's say. I took this philosophy, I took these principles, I took these values, and I transferred these values to my personal life and to my business life. And it works. It works. And I would be more than happy if you are convinced about for all of these ideas and all of these practices, because you also have to climb your own Everest. Thank you so much.
Are there any questions for Mr. Kotronaros?
Okay.
I guess you will stay around, so anyone who wishes to
Of course,
ask you anything.
with my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking for Eva. Hi, Eva. Do you want to come up here? Eva Polizogopoulou, Program Coordinator for the Program Area of Education at the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, will introduce the next subject and her co-panelists.
Hello, good afternoon to everyone. Mr. Kotronaros said at the beginning of his speech that in order to achieve all that, you have to think as a chess player, among others. So I think that our discussion today falls exactly in the center of the schedule of this conference today. As some of you might know or remember, one of last year's speakers at this conference was Garry Kasparov, who gave an inspiring speech about the importance of chess as an educational tool, and he also presented the impressive, I would say, results of his educational project in Africa. Almost immediately after the conference, we started thinking as well, and we started researching the benefits of chess and its connection with improved academic performance. During this research, I might say that we became intrigued and puzzled at the same time. We found out that tens of studies have been conducted worldwide on the social and especially academic benefits of chess. More than 30 countries have included chess in their educational curricula with impressive results as well. However, none of the above had taken place in Greece, despite the fact that more than 200 chess clubs operate in the country, and the Greek Chess Federation is organizing several tournaments with the participation of hundreds of students. Seeing this gap, the Stavros Niarchos Foundation explored the possibility of making to a few schools as a starter and as a pilot in Greece, thus placing the grounds for sharing the benefits of chess with all Greek students. Before, however, we engage further into our discussion with our two distinguished chess specialists here today, we would like to share with you some interesting facts about chess. Many have characterized it as the king of sports, the game of the millennium, or simply a means of getting smarter. Now, we would like to trigger your knowledge by asking you the following. Is it simply a game, or is it a work of art? Can it compete the mental and physical skills developed through the practice of other sports? Is it less enjoyable for children in contrast to other activities that do not require them to be so patient and concentrated? How is it related to music and mathematics? Are we all equal in front of a chessboard? At the end of the day, what distinguishes it from other sports? These are some of the questions that we'll try to answer today as we engage into, we hope, a rather interesting discussion with two of the people who, with the foundation support, have helped bring chess closer to Greek public schools. Allow me, having said that, to introduce to you Mr. Yannis Antoniadis, who is the president of the Association of Chess Players of Thessaloniki, and also Mr. Stelios Mimikos. His name is not on the program, he was a last-minute addition, who worked as the program coordinator. Please note that the discussion will take place in Greek, in case you need to use a translation service.
I will kick off with the question that might be something of interest to us all, and it has to do with whether involvement with chess, playing chess, is something that can make us smarter. Good afternoon. Thank you, first and foremost, for the invitation. And I'd like to thank the Stavros Niarchos Foundation for helping us in this and for inviting us here. The previous speaker said that you have to think as a chess player. Yes, indeed. Chess is something that exercises the mind. I see mountaineers actually exercising their muscles, and we actually flex our brain. And it offers us a lot of food for thought. It allows us to think analytically, positively. It helps us flex our strategy. And if these are traits of smart people, yes, of course, it makes us smarter. So you agree with Einstein? Well, I couldn't disagree, really, could I? So, following on to that question, if we were to read and see whether chess is important and can play such a role, we read up about the academic benefits that it can have in the academic process. But we also learnt that it also has social benefits. And I'd like to dwell on that because it might be best to make them known. Well, the less well known is something that we see here in the photograph, is that in front of a chessboard, both players are equal. You don't need to have any specific physical conditions. So that means that girls and boys are on a par. It means that people with physical handicaps can play. We see that blind people can play on an equal footing as the others in chess championships. And that's one factor. Also, we see that they're completely equal. The two players start on the same level. And something else, which is very important. You don't need to know the language. You can have anyone. And we see this at schools where there are migrants. They can be part of the class thanks to chess. Because they don't need to speak the language in order to play chess. So it is a mind game. Yes, it is a mind game, and that alone. Stelios, would you like to add something? Well, as a social benefit, I would like to add that it teaches us from very early on, if we start out at an early age. So what chess does magically, almost, is for them to be able to see things from other people's perspective. I think that's exceptional, because if we can't see things from other people's perspective in chess, well, there will be direct consequence, and that will be that you will lose. So we have to learn to be foresightful. Yes, we must also perceive what other people might do. So let's go to the next slide. Something else that we learnt, and I think this is directly related to the question, is whether it's simply a game or it's a sport. Above, that picture was actually taken. There's chess boxing. In chess boxing, we have boxers, sportsmen that is, that must have a Master A certificate of chess, and there's one round of boxing, one round of chess playing. However, the question stands. Is it one of the two, or is it both? It's both. First and foremost, it is a game. That goes without saying. It is an activity that can entertain us. Hence, it is a board game. But also it's a sport. And it is seen and treated as such because it requires what sports require of us. We need to have an organized systematic effort. We must follow the rules. We must make a great effort, do our utmost to achieve the goals. And this is also something that goes up to the championship level or to master games. And this requires what any sport requires of the participants. So it's both. Let's go on to the next one. One of the very well-known players has said that chess is everything. Art, science and sport. Is there a relationship amongst the three and chess? Well, that is why we consider chess to be so great, because it combines all three elements. It is a sport. We talked about that before. With respect to a science, yes, it is a science indeed, because it requires organization, systematic knowledge, and we have to seek objectivity. That's, in fact, something that science entails, and it is, in fact, an art because it also has creativity. It is also, in fact, a pleasure to look at, something that we have from a work of art. And we also have, in fact, chess art, which has to do with its artistic element. It's not played. It's rather solving problems or combining problems, a synthesis that has to do with the aesthetic pleasure of the people participating. We know that the great chess matches actually are a delight to watch. And I'd like to quote Marcel Dixanco, who was, in fact, an artist and chess player. He was part of the French chess team. And he had said that I know a lot of artists who are chess players, but all chess players are artists. Let us continue and take this further. I said in my introduction that there's a relationship between maths and music. I know the answer, but I think it is worth our while mentioning it here. And it's quite important. So what's the relationship of chess with the two? What's the common point? The first thing that comes to mind is that these are universal languages, all three. That means that somebody can communicate either through maths or music or through chess without speaking somebody else's language. So all three are fields that have brought to the fore children who are very prodigious. So we see that people who are very clever can be, in fact, discovered through these. So that means that involvement with these three fields allows us to enjoy them. I'd like to add, with respect to child wonders, because people might not know this if they're not aware of the field, we have prodigies in music. Gavagos was one such in my times. Beethoven was also in his time. They showed how prodigiously talented they were from a very early age. We had, in fact, in science, children who were able to solve equations from 4 years old. And this is also true in chess. We see that a 6-year-old may play against 10 adults and win them. And we have seen this time and again. We see that maths, chess, and music do not depend on one's experience that is related to one's age. They require imagination. The mind has to work in specific manners, and this can be done either at 6 or at 16 or 26 for that matter. And this is also true for music and for maths. Now, let's see if we need experience in the next question. Human versus computer. We've seen it. Is it a lost bottle? Have we lost it from the outset, or is there hope? Kasparov could have answered this because he was the one who placed against a computer. He won once, he lost once, so that was a tie. So it depends on the contest. Of course, computers are speedier. They can compute faster. There is absolutely no doubt about that. What the computer cannot do in chess is that the human mind can intuit. It can see what is the best position for a set of moves. The computer can't do that. It can do all the computations, all the calculations, and it can exclude certain positions. So that's the way the computers work. Computers are smart dummies because they simply make all the movements, all the moves rather, in order to exclude them. So it automatically goes to those moves that will bring about a better result for the player. I think intuition is something that humans use and that computers lack. We see that people are able to process a lot of things at the same time. So there's multitasking there, but the computers are more linear, and they actually do sets of computations. And with respect to the matches that we have the best result, we need a combination of both. And that's how we have, in fact, chess by correspondence. They actually write out the moves. They might use various types of machines or computers that analyze the matches, and in combination with people who propose moves to the machines that make the moves, we have excellent matches played out. So we have to wait for the rematch to see who will finally win out. Okay, we know that computers get stronger and stronger, so I think that they're able to calculate a larger set of moves. But of course, chess is never-ending, so it's infinite, and people always have their place. Or we haven't learned all the moves yet. So no, we cannot possibly imagine that chess will, in fact, come to an end. That we will know the potential moves and aspects when we start out a match. Strategy or tactics? Which of the two? In order for somebody to be considered a good player and move on, I mean. Well, there are two legs. We can't walk if we don't have two legs. Each one has its own properties, but its combination will allow us to be a good chess player. Strategy in a game is important. That's something that all chess players have when they're good. But if you can take advantage of certain tactical advantages that come up in a game, is something that you must be able to exploit. Otherwise, strategy is meaningless. You'll never be able to actually take the game. Now, from what we heard and what you've already said, do you consider that there is a place for chess in education? Yes, there is a need, and I think that we've seen it many years ago. In Greece, we have actually been rather long in incorporating it into our educational process, but it's now part of it. It's being done. But I must say that it's truly valuable for young people. We've seen it from experience. Many years of studies have shown that it allows us to develop skills so on a social level, on a psychological level, and allows people to develop their mental skills also. If one plays chess, one develops all of that, and that makes it take on a key role in education. And that's what we really need in education, to be able to take the knowledge from one field and generalize this knowledge. So I think that actually it allows us to utilize the knowledge in other skills.
So what's the ideal age for one to start playing chess? The younger, the better. The earlier, the better. I think the age of 5 to 7 is the ideal age. So this is related to preschool age, but even younger people than that, younger children can benefit because we know there can be a lot of play, a lot of activities to fire the imagination and to make use of various materials. So I think that in this way they can become familiar with chess and the various concepts surrounding chess and the value of chess. So tell us a little bit about this year, because this is the first year that we had a pilot program with the support of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation in schools. So let's look at a short video. Let's watch a short video that says Chess in Schools, the Case of Greece. Let's take a look.
κάνω μάτι. Γιατί απειλεί πιο πολλά κομμάτια.
Πώς ήταν?
So, what was the experience? How did it feel? And of course, you got into contact with children, and I want you to tell us about how the children reacted to all of this and whether actually it helped them improve their performance at school. And how did the parents and teachers react to all of this? So, first of all, we expected the children to react positively, and they did. They really embraced this program. It was done on a volunteer basis. Whoever wanted to play chess could do so. So we wanted a specific number of children per group, and when we had that number, we would start teaching that group of children chess. So there was a lot of interest. In the beginning, parents didn't know what this was all about. They had their own idea about chess, their own preconceived idea. But as time went by, they found it to be very rewarding in many aspects. First of all, they saw their children's performance at school improving, but they also thought that as a learning progress, it was a wonderful experience. So we worked a lot with the parents' associations because this couldn't be part of the actual curriculum, with the exception of certain experimental schools where chess could be part of the school curriculum. So together with the parents' associations, we got in touch with the headmasters, the school principals. So we got into contact with the headmasters. A lot of them reacted very well, very positively. And after getting the authorization by the Ministry of Education, meaning allowing to use chess in schools, and I'm talking about inside the normal curriculum, because there is 1 hour which can be used by teachers as they see fit. So that's where this chess hour was included in the school curriculum. A lot of teachers expressed an interest in having seminars for the teachers so that the teachers could make best use of the material we offered. Because we know that what's important is not just actually playing chess, but teaching children how to play chess. So we're talking about the material that we used. So we had a wonderful book which was translated from the Kasparov manual, because the Kasparov Foundation had a little book on how to teach chess to children. We used it, and the children really responded very positively because there were exercises in this booklet. It was very colorful, and the children really enjoyed this thoroughly. Any plans for the future? Now, future plans. Well, next year, we'll roll this out to 100 schools all over Greece. So we now have the material, we have gained the experience. So we want to do this in schools, not just in Athens. I think we should go to the most downgraded neighborhoods in Athens, to Agios Panteleimanas, Grava, these very downgraded areas, because I think that it can really help children at primary school, and it can help children become a team in the classroom. And I think we'll manage to do a great many things this year as well. So we wish you all the best, and we will stand by you. Now, the last question, and I'm not going to let them answer this question because we have to finish, is whether chess is the king of sports. So I'd like to share personal experience that I had by monitoring this program. I happened to be in a classroom in a school where we have children whose families have financial problems, so these kids may have psychological problems, and half of the hour was spent on how chess can help children to lose and to win, because it's good to know how to lose. You can't be a sore loser. And a little girl raised her hand and said, I always used to be selfish. I always wanted to win at home and elsewhere. So chess has helped me get over that. And I've learned how to lose, because you lose in life and you have to try again and again in order to succeed. So if one child got this message out of the program, I think that's our just reward, and it will help us in our future activities. So very best of success to you, and thank you very much.
We will now start the second of the day and final theme of our third annual conference, and this is arts and culture as creative assets and their socioeconomic importance. Before I announce our keynote speaker for this afternoon, I would just like to mention that as the time is really getting tight, following the keynote speech, we will have the final plenary session on creative assets as engines of prosperity and growth. So I'm announcing it in advance so you know the flow. Now it's a great pleasure to have with us Mrs. Catherine Watson, the director of the European Cultural Foundation, an expert to speak to us about what opportunities arts and culture really present, especially during these challenging times.
Thank you, Lena, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak. And thank you to all of you for your stamina. I think the last 2 days have neither been climbing Everest or playing a chess game underwater, but nevertheless, it's been 2 rather intense days full of inspiration and wonderful ideas. Thank you to the Stavros Niarchos Foundation for placing art and culture so firmly within the conference agenda. I think the soon-to-be-opened Stavros Niarchos Cultural Center is certainly a testament to the Foundation's conviction that cultural spaces are indeed an invaluable element in the ecology of our cities, and that these spaces of public encounter and participation are key to engaged citizenship and the sustainability of robust, future-fit communities. When I was watching the opening performance on Wednesday night, I couldn't not be struck by the fact that we were surrounded by apartment buildings, and all of them, I think, had the best view onto the performance that evening. And hearing from people in the last couple of days talking about the role of the library in the community, the role of the library in the complex, the role of the public park, I believe the biggest green space in the city, that this is definitely looking at the community ownership of that space. So in my reflection today, through the lens, I must say, of the European Cultural Foundation, I'd like to look at a few examples, a very few of so many examples of cultural projects that are crossing sectoral boundaries, and to, in that, consider the role of foundations in supporting them, in fact, catalyzing and fueling independent cultural work and connecting it to a wider community. So I don't believe it's about using art and culture as a tool. It's about culture as an equal, visible, and valued contributor to the sustainable development of our communities and to Europe. And I do hope you'll recognize in some of the examples, not only the faces, but the ideas and the inspiration from young people that addresses some of the alternatives that have been raised yesterday, the alternatives to the very difficult situation of youth unemployment. The European Cultural Foundation, ECF, was created in 1954 in Geneva by leading European thinkers with a vision for Europe. And their vision was much more than an economic association, much more than coal and steel. It was one that said Europe needed culture. In 2014, now that we celebrate 60 years, ECF still aspires to the European project, but as we all know, the context is much different now than it was then. Than it was when Robert Schuman boldly stated, Europe needs a soul. And I think we are still looking for that soul. In 1960, the ECF moved from Geneva to Amsterdam on the invitation of Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, the foundation's first president. ECF is an independent foundation built on 2 pillars, that of Europe and that of culture. Culture in its widest and most inclusive sense, and Europe in the broadest sense possible, spanning the continent and reaching out to the neighbors to the east and across the Mediterranean. ECF doesn't simply support culture because it happens in Europe, but for its contribution to Europe. And in this, we look at ways to being as impactful as possible and to scale our work by developing partnerships, working with other foundations, and hoping to go beyond being only a funder by combining grant-making with programming and advocacy. From 2013 to 2016, our strategic plan is driven by the theme, connecting culture, communities, and democracy. Sorry? This one. For 60 years, ECF's vision has been of an open, democratic, and inclusive Europe in which culture is a valued and key contributor. In recent years, however, we've witnessed a growing gap between people, democratic processes, and structures. People feel estranged from democratic institutions. At the same time, we have seen hundreds of organizations that demonstrate how culture can be invaluable in terms of engaging people in the future of their communities and indeed of the world. In essence, we are trying to connect or to reconnect the demos and the kratos and find the spaces, the agora, within which to achieve this. I believe that innovation springs from the spaces of interaction and intersection. And today I would like to consider art and culture in 5 such intersecting spaces. And these are intersections that I think we should be compelled not only to explore, but to nurture. They are those of the interlocal, intercultural, intersectoral, intergenerational, and interexperiential. In all of these intersections, we need to step out of our comfort zones and engage in some very active silo busting, and then consider these intersections when we develop our education systems, our communities, our places of cultural creation and exchange. So the first, interlocal. I used to talk about this as international, but the born-again nation-state is perhaps one of the grave problems of our time. Extreme nationalism and populist parties are hacking away at the very roots of our democracies, our diversity, our tolerance. So rather than thinking of Europe as a federation of nations, or even perhaps as a supernation, Europe really is a complex and rich web of intersections between neighborhoods, cities, and regions. We've seen that positive change through culture first becomes apparent in local communities. ECF aims to reinforce our connection with citizens who are raising awareness of their creative potential to generate new social, environmental, economic, and democratic models through their cultural practices. We've been trying to work in a very connected way with cultural organizations and the individuals we fund. One example is our Tandem Cultural Exchange program, which we do in partnership with several other foundations. The Tandem Cultural Managers Exchange is a process more so than a collection of collaborative co-productions. And this map shows some over the past 3 years in various targeted geographic regions. In the spring of 2014, the second round of Tandem Shamel, which connects organizations, individuals from Europe to the Arab Mediterranean region, was launched. And in this, I would also like to refer to a recent publication by ASEF, the European Asian Foundation, and it's a publication in advance of the ministers' meeting between the ministers between Asia and Europe. It's called Enabling Crossovers, Good Practice in Creative Industries. Tandem is only one of many, many examples in that, but I will speak just briefly about Tandem. So after the Partnership Forum in Tunis in March, 8 tandems found each other, and one of them brings together Abdullah Sharkis from the Yankeles for Visual Arts in Alexandria and Martha Buziuro from Plays to Place in Athens. Tracing Dinocrates discovers the Greek contribution to the city of Alexandria in relation to its cosmopolitan past. Within that, the project investigates and showcases the traces of the Greek presence in the city. It is reflected in the urban surfaces as well as on the lives and everyday practices of the inhabitants. Another example of connecting local actions is the Doc Next network that brings together media organizations in 4 cities, Istanbul, London, Warsaw, and Sevilla, all focused on youth and expanded media education. And this year, with partners, we launched something called a network program, which is set out to connect, nourish, and illuminate a network of local cultural changemakers, enabling a European-wide community of practice to emerge that evolves naturally based on common interest and enables members to learn from each other and collectively develop their ideas, skills, and expertise. The connected or networked local community building organizations present a very different picture of Europe, one growing from the bottom up through cultural actions. Our support of these organizations is not specifically project-based, rather recognizes not only their local relevance, but their wider resonance. The second intersection I'd like to talk about is intercultural. The increased movement of people over the past decades, and certainly the freedom of movement that many of us enjoy in Europe, offers us an incredible richness of connections and knowledge exchange. But are we using this diversity to our best advantage? I fear that we are not. I think simply of how I might recruit for a position. Do I keep a fixed agenda of requirements and experience, advertising and reaching out to the same places and platforms? If so, then I shouldn't be the least surprised to receive cookie-cutter CVs, people all trained in the same systems, having the very same perspective. Do we provide platforms for the stories, the visions, the narratives of all Europeans? Do we challenge the prevailing imageries and perspectives of mainstream media? For a number of years, ECF has supported individual artists, researchers, and cultural workers to travel to and from the EU through Step Beyond travel grants, small, responsive grants with a huge potential, I think, to kickstart careers and, more importantly, to foster and nurture new intercultural connections. Application is online through what's called the Step Beyond Lab, which is also the place where stories are shared and long-term connections are nurtured. The DocNext network that I mentioned earlier has been responsible for a collective project called Remapping Europe. With this multi-year initiative, the community-based media centers that form the network have worked with migrant and refugee youth organizations in their communities to empower these young, unheard voices to tell their stories through media and counteract the prevailing negative imagery of the deluge of migrants that mainstream media feeds us. The videos have been collected in a media collection with hundreds of videos online. This work has also resulted in a publication called Remixing Europe that uses as its starting point 4 local media incidents in the UK, Spain, Turkey, and Poland, and fueled a wider debate about the representation of migrants in the media. I've left some flyers describing the publication, and you can certainly receive it through our website. The third intersection that I would like to talk about is intersectoral, which I think is at the core of your conference, how culture works across sectors, how in fact we don't look at sectors anymore, how we look at things much more holistically. Now, from the perspective of a foundation that in our very name supports culture, I know we need to break out of a very comfortable box, or that box will become a coffin, and look at ensuring that culture is an equal voice around what I see as a metaphoric planning and development table that is not culture in service of itself or of the economy, but of culture as an invaluable fourth pillar in our sustainable development, alongside economy, the environment, and society. I'm mindful of language and the fact that our lexicon is not always a shared one. Recently in Zagreb, we were talking about these intersectoral connections, and it was clear that the concept also extends and should extend to the crossover between civil society and the public and private sectors. So this too should figure into our intersectoral engagement. Civil society has been feeling powerless and voiceless, but change does not come only from the vocal reaction to an issue or action, but by using these issues and actions as a starting point for a longer-term process of changing the frame or context and becoming an active and valued contributor. In 2013, through one of our regular grant calls, we put a special spin on it and asked for collaboration projects that were cross-sectoral by nature. Cross-sectoral, so culture working with finance ideas, culture working with social ideas, culture working with environmental organizations. And we've been inspired by the range of applications and ideas that have followed the grants with much interest. Within this call, there were several organizations from Greece. Artivists for Change is an initiative of the Dynamo Project Space in Thessaloniki in partnership with Jordan Open Source Association and Spring Lessons in Aufbauhaus in Germany. The project was developed with the contemporary context of the multidimensional social, environmental, and political challenges faced by communities in European and MENA region countries. It is concerned with ensuring that public expression of opinion, or activism, is more creative, less violent, more effective, and more fit into long-term change. Concrete outcomes include an online database of creative public space interventions, facilitating the exchange of knowledge and ideas between artists and activists, and the implementation of a training course on activism through design and social innovation in Thessaloniki. The main target group of Artivists for Change are young people, with a special focus on young artists and creators, as well as activists in different fields: social, political, environmental. And within this project, Moritz Bangkok's installation, Wave, is an interactive performance asking the public, passers-by, friends, refugees, to wave towards the sea. Before the action took place, the participants in Thessaloniki were invited to join a picnic inspired by the Balkan tradition to share a meal together by the graves of relatives. The performative intervention is both simple, clear, and at the same time ambiguous in its meaning. It greets the people who do and don't reach the European shores. At the same time, it is linked to the protest of Gezi Park, where the dancer and choreographer Erdem Gündüz, as standing man, became an icon for the protests in Turkey. Wave is an artistic reaction to the continuing loss of life in attempted passage across the Mediterranean. Moritz explains, "While Europe is facing a great interior crisis in economy, we are seeing the possibility of losing credibility of our democratic system if we cannot find a constructive solution for the incidents on the Mediterranean. His is an attempt to overcome apathy." The performance was repeated in Alexandria, Beirut, and Barcelona. Cultural activism and beyond activism was also acknowledged this year in the awarding of the ECF Princess Marguerite Award to Teodor Chelakowski, longtime leader in the Right to the City movement in Zagreb, and Teatro Valle Occupato, a growing group of theater makers who squatted Teatro Valle, Rome's oldest public theater, to save it from privatization. And I echo their message: culture, like water and air, is a common good. However, the work goes much beyond activism and much beyond the individual act. Teodor, for instance, and the cultural organizations he has spearheaded are now key players in the development processes of their community. They're actively engaged in their community and across Croatia. A major objective of the prize, which is awarded annually in Brussels, is to raise awareness on a European level of the change-making potential of culture. Change-making which is so often acted out on a very local stage. Another example of this cross-sectoral work is Urban Lightscapes, which may be familiar to some of you. The organization Before Light, who work across Greece, has partnered with the Institut d'Arquitectura Avançada in Catalonia in Spain, and SOAP, the social and artistic platform in the Netherlands. They're investigating and experimenting with the relationship between urban lighting and society by encouraging dialogue, active participation, and creativity. By bringing together local communities, academics, and professional contributors with light artists, the project partners will create participatory light installations in underprivileged neighborhoods of Maastricht. Issues of innovation, creativity, safety, and community cohesion run through this initiative. In 2014, having learned from the collaboration grant scheme of 2013, and in partnership with the community hubs in our network program, ECF has launched a first call for ideas, innovative cross-sectoral collaboration that engages Europeans in redefining and shaping public space. From the applications we receive, we hope to identify 50 innovative and hopefully viable ideas. These will be invited to a first, what we're calling Idea Camp, co-hosted by Les Têtes de l'Art in Marseille in October of this year. The Idea Camp will provide a safe and inspirational place for cross-pollination of ideas, allowing partnerships to emerge and ideas to flourish. The camp will be both a meeting place and a working place, including workshops around topics and methodologies that will help the selected participants to investigate and develop their ideas, exchange knowledge, find new collaborations, inspire and connect with practitioners from different sectors, and to explore and challenge new democratic alternatives. The application deadline is a few weeks away on the 15th of July. After the Idea Camp, The participants will be invited to submit their reworked and energized ideas for consideration for a research and development grant, of which we'll award 25 in the amount of €10,000. This, in fact, is new territory for ECF, moving far away from project support and looking to kickstart an idea long before it has a tangible outcome, bridging, we hope, the gap between the idea and possible project funding, fueling innovation. The fourth intersection is intergenerational. We are on the brink of the greatest generational imbalance that we in the Western world have ever experienced. Baby boomers are aging. I stand before you as a case in point. The generations that follow are not nearly so numerous. Baby boomers are holding on to jobs until they retire. Retirement ages are increasing in an attempt to mitigate the increasing social costs of aging. But at what other cost? The average unemployment rate across Europe, as we heard yesterday, for young people is 25%. But to arrive at that, some countries come in at much greater than 50%. We know that Greece approached 60% last year. Most of an entire generation is underemployed or out of work or overschooled and responsible to pick up the pieces that their parents and grandparents have scattered. Yet we look discreetly at aging and at youth issues. We often look at discreetly at aging and youth issues. In this cataclysmic moment, would it not be better to find intergenerational solutions and actively foster intergenerational knowledge exchange? Memory Box is an initiative that has come out of another of the tandem cultural managers' exchange streams, the one focused on community and participation. Memory Box aims to strengthen community cohesion by collecting and sharing people's personal memories from the city or the neighborhood they live in. Digital stories have been gathered through local storytelling workshops with older, often socially isolated participants living in Newcastle, young migrants in Magdeburg, and individuals living with a very new suburb in Arnhem. The Memory Box stories are available through an online app and in beautiful wooden boxes that are shared, at local community centers. And this example leads me to my last and fifth intersection, that of inter-experiential, a little bit harder to put in one word. And this project leads into it quite nicely because it uses new digital tools to bring together different sources of knowledge and generational experiences. Younger generations are often defined by being on one side of a very wide digital gap. Socioeconomic conditions make this gap more acute in both our urban and rural communities. However, the very technology that divides has the power to connect, as we heard both from the City of Manchester this morning and Nate Hill from the Chattanooga Public Library. So much in all, as there has been quite a significant, if I could call it, amateur bashing, the connection between the experienced and the expert that the internet affords is undeniable. In order to begin to address the global challenges we're facing, our sources of knowledge must be many and diverse, converging in the electrifying spaces, these intersections in between. Can we not place the nuclear physicist alongside a traditional Aboriginal thinker and healer, the physician beside the care worker and the patient who have suffered through all of the stages that the physician might study? It has been widely said that healthcare is too important to leave to the doctors, and I would add very loudly that culture has a role to play in this very important sector, now under siege due to economic pressures and, in fact, to the aging population. Connecting sources of knowledge for the future, or perhaps better described as encouraging a confluence of the flows of knowledge, is one of ECF's goals and against which we measure our impact. For a number of years, ECF has been host to the international online project Lab for Culture, and in the past year, we have taken a new look at online platforms and have developed ECF Labs, an open, user-driven space that encourages people to gather around themes, ideas, concepts. And we look at this to being a major source of knowledge for us and connection to the field, linking this knowledge to other sources, be they academic or practice-based. In closing, are we ready for these intersections? Can we rethink our systems to be more responsive, more dynamic, less stuck, less static? Can we foster a world of active citizenship? Recalling Peter Vermeersch's quote at the opening of my speech, democracy needs imagination. It's not simply about voting, it is about engagement, participating, voicing, making, and doing. Arts and culture is a powerful key. And I would like to end with a final, very short video about the Idea Camp and its theme of public space, encouraging you all to pass the message and the invitation to join, to passing it on to both cultural organizations and non-cultural organizations alike. And I think they're going to help me in the back. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are running late, so I think we would move immediately into the next plenary session, and I will encourage all of you to seek Swatson and talk to her and ask her any questions you might have. I apologize for that, but we need to move forward. Thank you.
was going to use. Everyone. They all bring them out. Okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Adrian Ellis, and I'm the moderator of this panel. And we shall be as concise and as to the point as we can be and try and save a little time. But it's a fascinating and it's a vast topic. Our subject is the role of creative assets as engines of prosperity and growth. And as you heard from Catherine, a Europe powered by culture, and as you heard from Sir Howard this morning about the story of Manchester, it would indeed appear that cultural assets are increasingly central in economic and social development. Now, if you think back through the whole arc of history, that would have been seen as a surprisingly counterintuitive statement. In fact, I think that if you had thought about the apex of Greek civilization or of Roman civilization, or if you'd thought about the Italian Renaissance or the English Enlightenment or the French Enlightenment, or even the Gilded Age at the end of the 19th and early 20th centuries in America, you would have been more likely to see the role of prosperity and growth in the, as an engine for cultural renaissance. In other words, we are increasingly aware of a line of causation that goes not from economy and society to culture, but from culture to economy and society. And that's really only in the last 20 years or so that those lines of argument have developed. And when they started, they were treated with a certain amount of fastidious skepticism by many. I remember early economic impact analyses about the economic impact of the arts, which have been talked about a great deal over the last 2 days in context of cultural tourism and in the context of regeneration and so forth. Most economists were deeply skeptical about the choice of multipliers. They were deeply skeptical about the displacement effect. I remember one very distinguished economist who gave a very incisive lecture on the methodologies of economic impact and pointed out that, you know, jobs were created by shoveling money out of helicopters too. So the climate has changed, and I think it's really because in practice it's clear that policymakers have found culture to have a role. And as the academic arguments have moved along in some ways in parallel with a growing awareness that investment in different forms of culture, both in capital and in operations, in formal, in informal, and in a broader definition of culture that includes sport, that includes entertainment, that includes creative industries, there is clearly a significant impact. And that is what we are here to explore this afternoon. And we have exactly the right panel for those purposes, because we have some policy wonks in the form of Sarah Selwood and in the form of Ian, both of whom have deep knowledge of both the policy context and the supporting academic literature. We have Tamer Padel, who is at the sharp end of raising significant sums of money and knowing what it is to which philanthropists and others respond. Yorgos and Christos have a mainland European perspective, both from Greece and France, and a perspective as practitioners and, importantly, as people with an artistic perspective, because one of the other interesting tensions in all this, or lines of discussion, is that as these instrumental arguments have grown and developed over the last 20 years to a significant point of relevance in policy decisions, there are those who ask, yeah, but aren't you missing the point? Isn't culture about culture? And isn't culture an end in itself? And don't these instrumental arguments in some way trivialize and undermine the underlying case? Well, no. That's what we're here to explore today. So I'd like to start off, if I could, with Ian and Sarah in any order. And what I want to ask is it true, at its simplest, that intelligent investment in culture has a positive impact on economic and social impact? And what then constitutes intelligent investment?
Can you hear me? Oh, hello. So I'm Ian David Moss. I'm research director for an organization based in the United States called Fractured Atlas, and I also write a blog called Create Equity.
Which I recommend everybody read. It is the key blog on many of these issues, so a plug.
Thank you. So in response to the question, the evidence from the research literature on the arts and economic and social impact implies that there is a relationship between the arts and economic development in general, particularly when you look at it through the lens of real estate asset development. So, which is actually not the most common lens through which to look at it. People tend to think about it more in terms of jobs or in terms of dollars being contributed to the economy in general. But actually the strongest evidence that's out there points to, at least in terms of a causal relationship between a concentration of arts assets, creative assets in a place, points to the subsequent development of land values, of property values in that area. And so there's been a decent amount of literature looking at this, and two of our earlier speakers today, actually, Mark Stern and Susan Seifert, have actually done some of the best work on this. And I really, if you're interested in this topic, I really encourage you to give their work a closer look. So that is a fact, or that is at least something that I think a reasonable person can feel fairly confident about, that relationship is there. However, there's a big difference between sort of making a claim or making a statement that the arts are great, and by the way, they contribute positively to the economy, and an alternative statement which says that the arts are the solution or the answer to making the economy stronger. The latter is a much more ambitious claim to make. And as Adrian was alluding to, even if it is the case that the arts do have a positive economic impact, there are lots of things. Almost everything, in fact, has a positive economic impact. So do sports, so does transportation, so do divorce lawyers, so does the illegal drug trade. So, you know, it's not necessarily that special to say that the arts have such and such, you know, an economic impact. And what we actually know much less about from a research perspective is how do the arts compare? How do the arts compare to other types of investments that one could make in the economy if you are in the position of, let's say, a foundation or a government to where you have a finite amount of resources and you want to grow the economy as strongly as you can, where do the arts fit into that mix? And so there's a really great research opportunity that has, I think, to date been untapped for the most part in terms of looking at the arts comparatively across, you know, and not just limiting the inquiry to the arts or to the creative industries specifically. And the final thing that I would say on that is that I think the implication from that line of logic is that it's really important for policymakers and people making these kinds of investments and allocations of finite resources to have a clear sense in mind of what well-being means in order to have a sense of where culture fits into that. Because if one defines it as more of a kind of economically focused, in a more economically focused way that might lead one to make different decisions about the role and place of arts and culture within that than if one defines well-being in a different way.
Sarah, you're the editor of Cultural Trends, which is one of the reputable and fastidious of journals dealing with the interface between culture and policy. What's your line?
Well, I think Ian has already given you a fantastically full and solid answer, and I don't particularly want to repeat some of it, though I might want to embellish some. For instance, we have a chain of greengrocers in England called Waitrose. We now talk about the Waitrose effect in terms of raising house prices in a radius around Waitroses. So I think your answer is right, that anything can begin to increase house prices. I think what's important is if you look at the history of those cities where there has been considerable investment in culture, and think about what that's done in the long run. And two spring to mind. One is Baltimore, which was one of the earliest examples of city where culture was invested, I guess in the 1970s, 80s, after the kind of industrial decline in Baltimore. It seemed to me, and you may correct me, Adrian, that it peaked and then it kind of went right down again. So there are issues about how long that kind of investment and those kinds of institutions are sustainable for, and which begs the question of what do they need to be both more resilient and more sustainable. Secondly, if you look at British cities, Newcastle on Tyne is a really good example. Newcastle in the 1960s onwards was kind of hit by decline of mining, hit by the loss of the shipbuilding industry, certainly in terms of the employment figures for the late 1960s, early 70s, had one of the lowest employment rates in the country. Newcastle attracted, for those reasons, lots of European money. It had social money from Europe, it had money to kind of rebuild infrastructures, and the cultural investment to Newcastle came at the very end of that. So we now talk about Newcastle and Gateshead, we talk about the Sage in Gateshead, we talk about the enormous culture attendances, maybe not so much, but certainly cultural investment in the arts in Newcastle. But what we forget is that that only comes at the very end of 30 years worth of investment in both social concerns and kind of infrastructure. And we like to think, and indeed the Arts Council of England will always talk about how the investment in culture in Newcastle kind of led the way to everything else, but in fact, frankly, that's advocacy, and if you look at the history of it, it's completely the other way around. So I think we need to think about those quite carefully, and we need to consider the context, the circumstances, and the timescale within which all this functions.
So let me ask you, Katie, a question. Katie Dixon, as well as being a director of special projects at BAM, which Brooklyn Academy of Music, which also has a fascinating cultural district, Katie had a bird's eye view of New York's cultural strategy under the Bloomberg administration as chief of staff for the very active Commissioner for Cultural Affairs. We tend to talk about culture as if it's an undifferentiated glob. In other words, a dollar on culture is the same thing wherever. But of course it's not. There are different forms of culture. There are different forms of investment in culture: capital, operating, programs, individual artists, infrastructure, etc. So tell us a little about the intelligent part of intelligent investment from the point of view of New York, and how a city which has a diverse economy, but also an economy which is critically dependent on its cultural offer, both in terms of tourism and also in terms of the creative industries that offer some sort of complement to finance, real estate, etc. What was the strategy, and did it work?
Thank you, Adrian. That's a great entree to talk about the incredible amount of investment that New York has made in the last decade. And it has happened in several different ways with very clear strategies, although they might not have always been articulated in that particular way. You could see the policy in the way the money was spent. And in the last 10 years under the Bloomberg administration, over $2 billion was invested in capital upgrades, new facility development, building projects citywide in all 5 boroughs, hundreds of projects. I think the total was somewhere around 500 different projects that received this investment. And the strategy was really one that treated these cultural facilities as infrastructure. So in the same way that New York invests in its sewage system, in its sidewalks, in creating new parkland and public space, it created these public amenities in the form of cultural facilities that require intense amount of investment for particular kinds of spaces. Theater requires particular ways of working depending on what you're doing. Dance rehearsal studios need space that is column-free and has certain ceiling heights, and these are the kinds of investments that can be expensive and hard to make. But New York City, I would say somewhat quietly, made this consistent and intense, robust investment over a concentrated period of time when they were able to begin and complete hundreds of projects, which have made and will make a very substantial change in the platform that has been created for the creation of work. And New York also has a fairly robust spending in program investments, and has about 1,100 different organizations that are funded every year for all sorts of programming. And we have a panel system of peer review that makes the decisions about how the funding is allocated. But it's between $30 and $35 million every year. And I would say the third prong in New York that has been really crucial to the development of the city for the last several hundred years is the commitment to public ownership of its major institutions. You may not know that the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Carnegie Hall, the Museum of Natural History, my institution, BAM, all of those facilities are owned by the city, and they also receive a dedicated operating support that it goes to its general operating support, so it's not for anything specific. It supports the maintenance of facilities, it supports the maintenance staff and security, but that annual commitment at a very baseline to supporting those institutions has been crucial to the way New York has developed as a cultural center of the United States and the world.
Yorgos, does this drive you mad? In other words, so much of the debate around culture in public life and the role of philanthropy appears to be about cause and effect and is unrelated or tangentially related to the quality of the art itself and the role of and the intrinsic merit of that art. Do you feel that over time we're doing a disservice to what you and your colleagues devote their lives to?
Well, first of all, I want to answer on history. You know, all this idea about economy and cultural investments and all of that, it's something that came very late. Many people started doing it without knowing what the effect was going to be. I mean, when in 1947, Jean Villard, who was a great theater director and actor in France, decided to go for a week down to the south with some actors just for holidays and maybe do some performances, he definitely didn't know he was going to create one of the major institutions of Europe for theater. The little town they went was Avignon. The success was so big. Since then, it's one of probably the biggest theater festival. All the other cities in Provence created a festival. Aix-en-Provence created an opera festival. Arles created a photography festival. And Provence became the #1 destination for tourists. So the economy changed immediately. That also happened in other places with other political regimes for other reasons, but sometimes with the same success. Of course, those that did not have success appeared one year and disappeared the year after, so I don't even know about. But let me tell you that 71 years ago, before 1947, 1971, a very good musician, not as well known as now, Wolfgang Wagner, had many, many money problems. And Emil Haeckel, who was a friend of him, said, why don't we do the Friends of Wagner? Nobody knew about that. The idea of sponsors, I think, didn't exist. So they went from Leipzig to Frankfurt, from Berlin to everywhere, find some money. Then he decided to go and maybe organize a festival. He thought first of Nuremberg, then of Munich, and then finally they went to Bayreuth, which was a small village that nobody knew about. Everybody knows about. And since, you know, so many years, it's a center, touristic, economically very, very successful. So that happened several times, sometimes not always with a success. I mean, in 1939, Louis Lumière, which was one of the two Lumière brothers, who invented cinema, decided to go to a small village in Côte d'Azur that nobody knew about and maybe organize a film festival. The village was Cannes. It was 39. The war started, so he had to cancel it. Then after the war, they didn't have the money. They started in 48, and then in 49, didn't work. Started in 51, and since then, the festival made of Cannes one of the major places of Côte d'Azur, bringing money to all the area, you know, and it's a very successful thing.
And 48 was the same year as the Edinburgh Festival, a similar story.
Yeah, absolutely. Edinburgh Festival, same thing. In Manchester, later, but same thing, yeah.
Christos, your perspective.
Well, I think one has to, there's definitely a trend over the past few years, and I think one has to see it in a broader perspective, because there's nothing wrong per se in wanting to find out how cultural activities impact the economy. There's nothing wrong per se, on the contrary, in trying to learn as cultural organizations how to be better managers and to make better use of funds, because all that is positive. However, I think one has to see this, this trend within a much broader political context, which I think a nice phrase in Tony Judd's last book, Ill Fares the Land, which is, you know, the withdrawal from the public sphere, the withdrawal of interest in the public sphere. Now that, I think, is worrying in a sense, because in many ways one needs to make sure that the kind of societies that we've grown up in, and our generation, which have been very lucky, I would say, overall, in growing up, at least in Europe, in broadly speaking, very democratic environments, very open, very free. All these things depend on certain shared values, and the vehicle for these values and the critical terrain on which these values have often been developed have been the arts. And so there's a very strong correlation between public interest in the very, very, very broad sense of democracy and a lively artistic sphere that people can relate to as being their own as well.
Arts and humanities.
Arts and humanities, exactly. So I think what we're seeing is a certain withdrawal from anything that's not immediately perceptible as utilitarian. And in doing that, in fact, we're being very practically negative in our approach to the kind of social environment that we really need and have grown accustomed to and so used to, we might not even notice it anymore.
But when you are, for example, and I want to bring Tamar into this as well, when you are looking out at the environment and seeking to secure funds, do you feel that the need to articulate a case that has metrics and accountability built into it is somehow an affront, or do you think it's integral to the process by which you learn whether you're spending your funds intelligently? Well, I was either of you, both of
you.
Okay. Tamar.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think it was absolutely essential for us at Lincoln Center to have the economic data and the economic impact in order for us to successfully raise $1.2 billion as part of what Katie was describing as a transformation of cultural facilities and institutions in New York City. If we didn't have that data, and if we didn't have the tools to articulate our cases for support, whether it was for a wealthy individual, a foundation, a corporation, or for the city or state of New York, we would not have been successful. And I think it was absolutely imperative. And we had some good news to report. Yes, it was the kind of traditional metrics that we have to date, but we at Lincoln Center were able to say that we generate $3.4 billion of economic activity for the New York metropolitan area. And we welcome 5 million visitors who have an economic impact combined of $660 million. The property values is another measurement that you heard, and that also increased, and increased significantly. Before Lincoln Center was built, it was an area of slums. And the property values have increased by an average of 8% a year, while the rest of Manhattan, those property values have only increased at an average of 5% a year. And we attract 5 million visitors annually. And the visitors themselves, while they do incremental spending in the city while they're there, it's important to know that they spend money not only on tickets, but they spend money on restaurants, on hotels, on transportation, shopping, as well as other activities, which is very important for the overall economic benefits in New York. While we believe, we at Lincoln Center are synonymous with world-class excellence in the arts, and that the campus attracts the world's leading artists and ensembles, we really wouldn't be able to do that as effectively and as efficiently without the economic backbone, so to speak, about the importance and relevance of the 16 acres that we maintain in the middle of Manhattan.
So, there was an issue that was alluded to in the earlier session, the workshop session on the Stavros Niarchos Cultural Center, and it was also alluded to by Sir Howard this morning, which is that it's easier to raise money for capital generally than it is for operating. There's a sort of inverse relationship between the ease with which you can raise philanthropic and public funds and their utility in what you do. It's easier to raise money for capital than operating. It's easier to raise money for new programs than old programs. It's easier to raise money for the marginal cost of new programs than the full cost of new programs. It's very difficult to raise money for bathrooms and cleaning them. So there's a sort of dilemma at the heart of a lot of this. But if one looks ahead, one sees that the sorts of successes that were associated with Bilbao and are associated with Lincoln Center and others, people are attempting to replicate that around the world. My company did a piece of work about 2 years ago that, for the British Council, looking at capital investment in large-scale cultural projects around the world. The result was that over the next 10 to 15 years, there's approximately $220 billion worth of investment in infrastructure buildings around the world. Now, my question to you is that ultimately a negative-sum game? In other words, is the world competing for cultural tourists in a way that ultimately sucks resources rather than creates this? Or is this the next renaissance of culture? Because that list is an astonishing list, and these aren't paper projects. These are things that are coming out of the ground. So who would like to answer that? Yes.
I think it's the next thing, as you said. I think, first of all countries are different. Everybody can invest in a different way of culture and art and everything. I don't think here we do as much as we could do in Greece, for instance, because we have an amazing number of ancient theaters and monuments that we don't really know which strategy we should adopt. We respect them. Then you look at them like a cemetery, nobody approaches. Instead, we give them life and bring young people and work close to it and make music. And we do for the first time now, the festival, 26 performances in 26 theaters that I didn't know a couple of months ago that it exists. And this is something that can help. I think in France they're doing a lot, in England they're doing a lot, and I think we can all do something like that. They start also in Asia, in places that nobody used to go to organize performances, bring orchestras and do music. I don't think that one can, of course we will compete, but you're doing your festival, I'm doing my festival, and of course, as you said very well, they're going to New York to see this kind of performances, New York Philharmonic and Metropolitan Opera and all of that, and they would go to Manchester or elsewhere to do something different.
And while capital campaigns are very attractive, they're exciting, they're sexy, they're fun, they're big, there's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end, there's donor recognition, there's all of that, there's great excitement. I think for those organizations who do capital campaigns well, they will end up with a much stronger, much more robust, much more diverse base of funders if they do it right through the process, so that your donors will be excited about the programs that you are putting within those plazas, on those stages, and in those halls.
Katie, you have a colleague in Karen who is regarded as one of the most redoubtable, along with Tamar, one of the most redoubtable fundraisers in the city. What would her perspective be? And indeed, what is BAM's?
Well, I think that no money is easy to raise, and the capital money, as you say, Tamar, is a great opportunity to build your community of supporters. We're an equal opportunity fundee, and as Adrian mentioned, if some of you have encountered my boss, Karen, and she is incredibly aggressive, as we are constantly at BAM about fundraising, and we have so many different things that it's possible to fund on the operations side, from the 123 different programs that we offer in any season, from kids education to senior cinema to the Lyon Ballet. And in addition to that, we position ourselves as a community institution with the multiple offerings that we have and the constant activity that we have going on in our houses. One of the important things that has contributed to our success and has contributed to our longevity and strength and growth is that we are an institution that plays a vital role in Brooklyn and an important role in civil society. And we are that third place for so many people. We have a very strong brand. People expect to have a new and different experience when they come to BAM. I talk to friends all the time who say, I have no idea what I'm coming to see next week, but I'm coming to see something at BAM. What is it? And oftentimes they leave and they still have no idea what it was that they saw. But they keep coming back because we provide a different, exciting experience, a place to meet your friends, to experience new ideas. And that is really crucial to driving us forward and to raising money.
I'd like to ask one more question, then open it up to the audience. My question is this. At the same time as we're living in this golden age, it would appear, of investment in culture, there appear to be issues on the demand side of the equation. In other words, at that very same time, if you look at long-term data on audience attendance for a lot of the higher end of culture, it would appear to be either steady or declining. If you look at spend per individual audience member on marketing budgets and audience development, if you look at the priority given to attempting to sustain audiences, aging audiences, you would have the impression that you're living in a different world from the world of this, this conversation. Can you square those two? Can you explain why it is that at the same time that many people in the arts feel very challenged about the size of their audiences, we are at the same time celebrating this level of investment? Ian.
Well, I represent an organization that works with a lot of individual artists in the United States. We're sort of a nonprofit tech company, technology company that provides business tools for artists. And what we're seeing is that one of the kind of features of our time is that we're sort of living in the age of entrepreneurship for the artists. Artists were always entrepreneurs in a sense, but in the past recent decades, there's become much more of an awareness of the need for that. And when I say artists, I don't just mean individual people. We're now also seeing a greater trend towards small kind of loose collectives, very small organizations that do projects with very little overhead and so forth. And we've seen an explosion in this, not just outside of the kind of formal nonprofit NGO structure, but even within the sort of space of nonprofits, there are more and more and more of these new entities forming, which I think is driven in large part because of the increase in graduates from visual and performing arts programs. That's a big driver of it. So the result of this, I think, is that there's this perception of an incredible, amazing vitality, because it's true, of all of this, this creative activity taking place in our cities, in our cultural lives. It's incredibly vibrant. But and so the choice, the amount of choice for consumers has increased a lot. But it's not necessarily the case that there are that kind of overall body of people supporting the arts, consumers of the arts, is necessarily keeping up with that. And I think that some of the larger institutions are finding themselves in a position where they're having a lot more competition, frankly, among the rest of the kind of aspects of cultural life. And so there's a lot of discussion about sort of how to stay relevant and reach new audiences, reach more diverse audiences, and so forth. That is kind of particular to institutions of a certain scale.
So do you see a process of rationalization ahead? In the private sector, if there's a mismatch between supply and demand, there's this horrible process known as rationalization, where capacity is taken out of the marketplace. Do you see that ahead?
To a certain extent, I do. But I also would say that a lot of people expected a lot of big, major arts institutions to die when the Great Recession happened in the United States, well, worldwide, but in the United States in particular, in around 2008, 2009, et cetera. And it really didn't happen. There were definitely a few organizations that disappeared, went under, and so forth. But nonprofits in general, maybe arts organizations in particular, I'm not sure. But they're very resilient. They have a lot of resources at their disposal, and I don't just mean financial resources.
Political resources.
Exactly, and so they have ways. People made it work. They made it work by cutting their expenses, by renegotiating contracts with unions, by kind of pulling out every trick in the kitchen sink, and most of them were able to survive.
Christoph.
Well, I think audience development is obviously a key issue. I mean, even for organizations that have assured funding and operational funding, you have to make sure that you're actually being relevant. And I think that means adapting to what the environment is. And I would identify two levels at which organizations have to do that. The first thing is that the art world itself has evolved tremendously over the past decades. There are no longer these clear distinctions between genres, and everything is much more mixed, much more intermediate. So, and the audience is used to that. There's no longer such an interest in pure disciplines. People are interested in a much wider variety of stimuli from the arts. And as an organization, you have to be aware of that kind of interest that's there. The second area in which I think organizations have to evolve is what their role is, in fact. I think it's no longer the role of an arts organization just to present art. It's to be an active community player, just think, as Katie said. And that's, I think, becoming equally important. I mean, the role one has in education, the role one has within social organizations and communities of various kinds, at least from our perspective, is almost on a par with the significance of presenting a beautiful artwork. And that, I think, is something one has to come to terms with.
Questions? We have an expert team, sir. Do you need a mic or project?
I think nobody wants to say.
We can hear you.
Go. Declare who you are.
Or forever hold your peace.
Thank you. Franco Becchis, Foundation for the Environment and the Turing School of Local Regulation. My question is about creating value. That is a serious thing, and I would suggest probably to be cautious in attaching real value to the increase in property prices, real estate prices, due to community phenomena. And I'm interested in your opinion. And what about taxing real estate rents in order to finance a particular and focused initiative in the cultural field?
Katie, I'm going to ask you to respond to that first in the light of the discussions we had last week on this topic.
Sure. I think that what we've seen at BAM, and as Brooklyn's fortunes have really risen around BAM, I think that it's very difficult to actually draw a causal relationship between our work explicitly and rising property values. Nor necessarily would we want to when we're talking to our community who have concerns about displacement and gentrification. And these are very difficult issues in New York in particular and all over the world. But the idea of how the contributors to economic prosperity capture the rising tide as everything improves is a great question and something that we're grappling with in New York and neighborhoods all over. Many of you may be familiar with the High Line project that was developed in the Chelsea and Meatpacking District in New York. And there was a lot of talk about how to create potentially an improvement district around that project that could capture some of the property, could place property taxes on some of these developments that were springing up unexpectedly. They anticipated that there would be some positive effect from that project, but it was astronomical and just sort of exponential, the economic effects and development springing up all over the place, and trying to figure out how you can tax those developments to maintain that park in perpetuity. And it was difficult to figure out because it wasn't in place before the project happened. In the cultural district around BAM, we are creating several new public spaces that are going to need to be maintained. And we're talking about putting a business improvement district in place that would impose a tax on the property owners in the area that goes back to the maintenance of the public space. Now, it doesn't create a special fund for the cultural facilities per se, but it does contribute to the funding that otherwise would have to come from the public or private sector to maintain the public spaces that will be crucial to outdoor performances and the success of that neighborhood. I think other cities have looked at hotel taxes and other creative ways to do that, but it's an important and excellent thing to look at.
Anyone else have a perspective on that specific question? Another question. No more questions?
It's been a long day.
It has been a long day. Do you want to use this opportunity to catch up the time by a few minutes? Still? Yes. Then I'm going to thank my panel. Thank you very much.
We're going to move right away into the closing keynote speech, and I'm delighted to welcome Jennifer McCree, who will speak on transforming the practice of philanthropy, 10 lessons on giving and getting. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Great to see you all, and wonderful to have this opportunity to close out this conference. And I know I'm between you all and cocktails, so I'll make this quick. We're going to have about 20 minutes of remarks, and then if there's any questions and answers, I'm happy to entertain them. So let me just start by saying that my theory of change in my life's work is that there are ample resources out there to get all the work done we want to get done in the world. And that's been a constant theme of this conference. And by resources, I never just mean money. I mean people's time, which is, of course, our most valuable resource, our networks, our creativity, our life experience. So there's ample resources to get all the work done you all want to get done, but they get stuck because of the obstacles that we put up around them. And so what I want to share with you today in these 10 quick practices is some ways that we put obstacles up and how we might consider seeing them so that we can let resources flow. So I started as a fundraiser 26 years ago. I used to tell a joke that, I know what you're thinking, that I started 14 years ago, when I was 14, but nobody laughs anymore. So I just say, people think I've been doing this a long time. Anyway, I started a long time ago. I was working for my tiny little college in Pennsylvania in America. And I was very lucky because my college president was a seasoned fundraiser himself. And he said, we're raising money for a new science building. You cannot raise money sitting behind a desk, which is the truth. You've got to be out there meeting with people. Here's a blueprint for the science building. Go make 300 face-to-face visits this year. And so, oh, and by the way, he said, you're covering New York City. And I had barely ever left Pennsylvania. So, undaunted, I threw myself out into the field and would meet with alumni and parents and friends, and I'd sit in their office and I'd make some small talk and try to create rapport. And I would pull out the blueprint and say, here's the new science building, your name goes here. What do you think? And I was getting no response. I mean, zero. I wasn't even getting second meetings with people. And so I remember about halfway through the year, and this moment is absolutely emblazoned in my mind. I was walking up Fifth Avenue back to my nonprofit-sized hotel room, and I was walking. It was the 80s, by the way, so I remember visually this big 80s hair and shoulder pads and this briefcase with my little blueprints in them. And I walked back to my hotel room and I sat down on the bed and I said, this is horrible work. I absolutely hate fundraising. I have to get a new job. And I was a philosophy and English major in college and thought, what could I do? What could I do? And I had this epiphany, though, because I remember thinking, something is not adding up for me. I know the people with whom I'm meeting care about education and science and innovation and the leaders of tomorrow. And I also know that I cared about those things too. So what was the disconnect? And it really was this epiphany moment that the disconnect was I was putting money at the center of the relationship. And as soon as you put money at the center of any relationship, there's a power dynamic that's inherent in that whoever has the money has the power or perceived power, and whoever is looking for the money is in the supplicant position. So I made a vow from that day forward never, ever, ever to put money at the center of any relationship, and instead keep the work itself in the center of the relationship. And in that way, money becomes the gas in the car, not the driver, not the destination. And if we keep money in its proper perspective, there's the ability to go in and talk about these resources that are needed to get all this good work done, but we can go in standing up, right? Never kneeling down, because I think there's this perception when we're looking for resources that we kind of have that begging bowl out there. And when you're proud of the work you're doing, there's the ability to just absolutely embrace looking for partnerships. And let me say, I don't demonize money, it's just one resource, but I think money is one of the most challenging issues in all of our cultures. And so one of the things that I really practice and I teach is, just think about, consider what values are you infusing in money? Because if you're infusing the values of scarcity and control and power or manipulation, of course it's going to be something that's difficult and challenging to have conversations about. But if you're infusing money with values of justice and courage and commitment and change and love, there's a whole, which I think is something that Andreas was talking about from his very opening remarks, there's a different quality of the conversation. I did a workshop on Monday where I had a bunch of philanthropists and nonprofit leaders and social enterprise CEOs who got together. We did a day-long workshop, and I had them do an exercise where the philanthropists had to pair up with a social enterprise or nonprofit leader, and they had to solicit each other. And we just randomly pulled out $10,000. And it was such an interesting conversation because every one of them, even the most seasoned fundraisers, could talk with great clarity about his or her work and why they were passionate about it. But we're stumbling over the ask. And so we unpacked and spent a long time talking about Why is it that we get stuck? And so I encourage each of you to really be thinking about your own experiences with money. Whether you're by the way, I work with lots and lots of philanthropists who have as much issue, have as many issues and baggage around money, don't want to be seen as just a giant. I mean, I have yet to meet a philanthropist who wants to be seen as a giant walking checkbook. And nonprofit leaders and social entrepreneurs, we all have our own biases around money. So I encourage us to be thinking about that as we think about how we're building partnerships, not donor relationships. I started a nonprofit with Quincy Jones, the great music producer, and it's an organization that was bringing music to kids. And I remember us sitting there thinking, what should we call this? We knew we wanted to use Quincy's name, but we decided to call it the Quincy Jones Music Consortium because the word consortium comes from the Latin word constare, which means to stand together. And this is very different from the word client, which is how I think we often think about our philanthropic partners and donors. The word client comes from the Latin word clientum, which means to lean against. And if you think about creating a client relationship, you're negotiating all the terms of the contract up front, right? So you're saying, here's what we want to do, here's what we need you to do for us. We're going to put this negotiation proposal together, and then we got to fulfill the terms of that contract. Well, the challenge with that, what I see with a lot of organizations, is then we're not always so transparent because we want our donors to feel good. And I see this all the time in board meetings where I see people putting up PowerPoint presentations where you just see the graph, going up with good news. And of course, the challenge with that is how are we growing or changing or learning or being adaptive? And the difference is if right from the start, you're creating a consortium of people who are standing together to get work done, there's a lot more risk capital involved. There's the ability to recognize what went well, what didn't, where can we make change, where can we be adaptive. So again, it's a different kind of experience. And this is even true, I think, with so-called socioeconomic peers. Now, I would argue that peers aren't necessarily socioeconomic peers, but I work with a great philanthropist, a guy who I've worked with for many years, a guy called John, who runs one of the biggest private equity companies in the world. And he and I have worked for about 10 years together on extreme poverty eradication and global health initiatives. And he's very passionate about it and very willing to go out and have conversations with people about joining with us. And so he in the early days when we started working together, he would meet friends and business associates at Davos and other places and say, I'd really like to come and speak to you about the great work we're doing in extreme poverty eradication. And so he and I would go and have conversations and meetings. And he'd tell people a little bit, do the small talk thing, talk to them a little bit about the work we're doing and say, so can you help me? Can you help us? And like the days of my pulling out the blueprint, he was getting no response, even though these were business associates and peers of his. And so after a couple of meetings, we walked out and he said, why is that not going so well? Why am I kind of getting a blank stare when I'm asking people to help? And I said, well, John, the challenge is when you're using the word help, that power dynamic is back in the mix. Even though you're socioeconomic peers, you're asking for help, so you're in the supplicant position. So what if you just changed your language? And we've talked a lot in this conference about how much language matters. What if you changed your language just a little bit and said, how can we work together? And in that switch, it becomes an equalizing, again, consortium of people who are taking responsibility, shared responsibility for shared purpose. And I take this very seriously. When I'm inviting people to join with me, I never say, will you make 10 calls? My language is, will you take responsibility for making 10 calls or whatever it is? Because again, there's a very different dynamic at work when you're inviting people to take responsibility and not asking them just to help you. So, we talked about a whole series of obstacles already. Let me just tell you a little bit about another one that I see that's interesting. So again, I work with a lot of philanthropists, and I have watched this kind of evolution of people's philanthropic journeys over the last 26 years. When I see a lot of philanthropists enter the philanthropic space, it's at a point in his or her lives where they've made enough or feel like they have enough and they can start giving back. And what I see is very often they have kind of a social worldview. And so, I've made enough, I can start to understand where I fit into this social structure by where I give. And this is the place of, where's my table at the gala? Where's my name on the letterhead? Whose other names are on the letterhead? Where does my name go on a building, etc. Let me just caveat that with I absolutely, fundamentally believe people should take a stand with their money. That they should name stuff, they should inspire others, that we need tribe. Tribe is incredibly important, so who else is with us, and our names on the letterhead matter, but not if it's only egoic. And the problem is with some philanthropists that it becomes an egoic practice of just that piece, so just about the social piece of giving. And that in the business of fundraising often leads to what we call the gift that keeps on costing, where somebody gives a gift, and if there's a lot of ego involved, they just try to take your strategy a little bit over here or a little bit over here. And so our work is really about working together to say, all right, how can we move out of this, as a worldview, to there are real problems to be solved. And that's the evolution I see with many philanthropists is moving from, giving as a social exercise to giving is about impact and change. And philanthropy has the possibility of creating real change. Now, the interesting thing about that is that while there are all of these challenges that are real and that we need to solve, the world is an unfinished opus, right? There's always going to be challenges to solve. And so the most sophisticated philanthropists with whom I've ever worked have really seen the opportunity to be philanthropists as a challenge of co-creation, of collaboration, and that these challenges that we're trying to solve for aren't disaggregated. And so it's, incredibly naive of us to think that HIV is disaggregated from global health, is disaggregated from clean water or from any of the other things. Now, I happen to work on HIV. I work on eradicating mother-to-child transmission of HIV, and I believe that that's an important point of entry, but it's only a point of entry. And so another obstacle we put up is the belief that we have to work on a specific issue. Ideas really fragment us. We think we're about our issues, but the challenge is in the US alone, there's 1.8 million nonprofits. There's 3,000 new nonprofits created every month in the US. I do work all over the world. There's more than 2 million nonprofits in India, more than 1 million in China, 1 million in Africa. All of you have great ideas. And the problem is, so how do you, and this is one of our other major obstacles, is this fear of rejection. How do you go in and try to say, my idea is more important than your idea? I did a training for the Nature Conservancy, and I'm not kidding. The oceans people were fighting with the trees people, trying to make a case that one was more important than the other. And so our opportunity isn't to necessarily go in and say, my issue is more important. Our opportunity is to go in and say, if you join with me, if you're joined with us and you're part of our consortium, you're going to make a difference. Because in the end, again, our most valuable resource is our time. And if we're giving our time and our passion and our creativity and our money and our networks, we want to see change happen. And so I believe, personally, there's very few issues that I could not mobilize resources for and build a team for. Because I know that what I'm looking for isn't what's my issue, but who are my people? Who are those people that are going to join with me to create change? So let me just say my last obstacle and there's many more, and if we had more time, we can unpack lots of these, because I really, again, believe resources just flow if we're mindful of these. But I think our last obstacle is just this, there's just this awareness, this is really demanding work, that it takes a lot of courage. One of my colleagues at Harvard calls this work The work of the head, the hands, and the heart. The head being strategy, the hands being resources and how we're using our resources in new and innovative ways, and the heart being about courage. And again, Andreas, you talked about courage in your opening remarks. And I think of courage being about the heart, and the heart not being this sort of soft, gushy Valentine kind of thing, but an instrument of vision. And so how do we avoid burnout in this work? And there's lots of, I think, ways to do that, one of which is to really remind ourselves and ask ourselves, and I do this very frequently, this exercise in my class that I teach at Harvard, and it's really to ask ourselves constantly, why am I called to do this work? It's a hard question sometimes for people to answer. Of all the things I could be doing, why am I called to do this work? And then why are we called to do this work? And why does the world call us to do this work? And why now? Why now of all the times in our world? What's the urgency? And not urgency like the world's coming to an end. I think this is often where the environmental movement kind of goes off the rails, is they're using fear to influence people versus a sense of possibility. Urgency and what Dr. King called the fierce urgency of now. We have this opportunity to create change. And so one of the exercises, and I'll end with this, one of the exercises that I use very often to remind myself that there's a lot of meaning in the work that I'm doing and that we're all doing. And again, I do this exercise with boards I work with my 13-year-old stepkids, with lots of people. And it's an exercise that another friend taught me. And it's really simply called SIM, S-I-M. And the practice is this, is to just think about today, all that you heard today. Think about a single conversation, whatever. At the end of this conference, just reflect on something that surprised, inspired, or moved you. SIM, something that surprised, inspired, or moved you. Because we lead these lives of deep meaning, but we forget about it because we're so caught up in the day-to-day, and we're not present. And if you can end each meeting or conversation or day with something that surprised, inspired, or moved you, you're going to recognize how much you're doing day in, day out. And it is an antidote to burnout and to keep the demands of this work really alive in your hearts. And so with that, I'll just end with one of my favorite quotes, and that's from Proust, who says, "The journey of discovery begins not with new vistas, but in having new eyes." So thank you very much.
I think we have time for a couple of questions for anyone who would like to.
Everyone's tired. All right. Thank you so much.
Hello. As you have noticed, just outside this